Good afternoon. I'm Larry Hoffer, the Executive Director of AIS, and I am your host for today's installment of Ask an Architect. I'm very excited to be joined by Michael Peterson today. And so, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. I appreciate the invitation.
So tell us a little bit about your educational background, your career, your architectural experience. Give us a little bit of a picture of who you are.
All right. So to the millennials out there, if you've seen the movie Pocahontas, that's where I'm from. I'm from Virginia Beach, Virginia, the only watershed in Virginia that is not the Chesapeake Bay. Grew up there and worked my way up to the University of Virginia for undergrad. Graduated in 2015, moved back home to an architecture firm, worked there, was transferred to the capital of Virginia, Richmond, and then found another opportunity in the area close to the capital of this great country, near Washington, D.C. By that point, I saved up enough to go back to grad school, back at the University of Virginia, where they had just changed the curriculum to comply with NCARB and make everything fantastically refreshed. Graduated from grad school in the fine, ripe year of mid-2020. So had a little bit of challenges trying to get back at my old firms because they weren't trying to fire anybody to replace me. So after a few searches, I found myself back near DC. And after DC, I decided to follow love and follow my wife to Austin, Texas, where I now reside at Boca Powell Architects. And am on my architectural career path out here in Texas.
Great, great. Austin's such a terrific city. So what made you pursue a career in architecture? What was it that inspired you to become an architect?
I've had a little bit of experience trying to parse this story down, but it brings it closer to my father was an architect until he had me. Then he went over to the dark side to be a lighting representative. However, he refused to buy me Legos. So the only toys I had growing up related to architecture were wooden blocks that were both his and his father's and his father's father. So after going through and building up as tall of a building as I could with wooden blocks, they decided that maybe he might like architecture.
Well, it's good that you came by it that way. The family heirloom of blocks helped inspire you. That's a fun inspiration. Where does your passion for art and design come from? Do you think it comes from that or other things, other sources?
The quick and easy answer that I've always thought was my predetermined path was in middle school. Each quarter, we would have a different elective, and I chose art, computers, woodshop, and woodshop 2, which turns out that are really valuable in college because I knew I knew the way to not chop off my finger in woodshop. And just the little things that were part of each one of those classes. Like, you think about this way: look to your neighbor, ask them what they're doing, see what they are doing and how you can implement that into your own process to make yourself better. And then same with high school. I took a class to learn Photoshop and Illustrator, learned what vector graphics versus rasterized graphics were, which, put me a week ahead of everyone else in architecture school, but I could only rest on my laurels for so long before I needed to learn the more advanced things.
um, in your mind, what do you think are the most important qualities that an architect should have?
That is a fantastic question. The qualities that an architect should have should be one of the synonyms for resilience, something along the lines of tenacity or the ability to build off of what you've learned through either success or failures. Learning this is the right way to do it, or this is the wrong way to do it. Now I know how to not do it again in the future. So trial and error, learning from experience. There's only so much that looking at or watching a YouTube tutorial can teach you versus following along with those tutorials and actually learning why you couldn't click here or why you couldn't click there. Learning the actual routes to figure out a problem, being resilient and knowing that, oh no, there's an error window. Let me not read it and hit okay. It's not the way that you should do it. It's the main thing is you should learn how to learn how to work in a new software rather than learning how to work in a specific software or learning how to only meet with these kind of people, learning how to meet with new people, learning how to leverage the fact that you've learned how to learn outside of architecture. So I think the most important thing for an architect to know is, or to even consider is the learning process rather than specifically the learning of a specific piece of the process.
Do you feel that architecture school adequately prepared you for those to have those qualities, or are those more qualities that either you had or have developed through your career?
I would say it's about 60-40. As my father was a salesman, the piece of information or the piece of wisdom that he wanted to impart was it's not necessarily what you know, but how other people know you. You don't have to know everybody. You don't have to be like Hannah Montana and know all the people in Hollywood because your dad is Billy Ray Cyrus. It's more so you have to know how to interact with other people so they can see your skill set or they can see how great of an asset that you are, what value you bring to the table. Because if you just, if you can do everything imaginably possible in SketchUp, Revit, or AutoCAD, that's fantastic. But if you can't demonstrate that or elaborate on that, make an analogy to that, to somebody whose job isn't to understand why this specific wall assembly in Revit or this particular piece in AutoCAD isn't connecting, you're going to have a harder time compared to the person who can adequately explain in simple terms to the layman, this isn't right, because a simple explanation versus someone who can explain, well, this isn't right because your system isn't right, because your update isn't right. It's a lot of editing yourself down to explain in more clear details why certain things are the way they are to the people that do care those details or even don't care those details about those details. There's a lot of people that you have to interact with that do not understand or don't know everything that an architect has gone through in school or has gone through in work, they may not be able to relate. So the biggest piece would be figuring out the right way to relate to them.
I think that that's a skill that you need in almost every profession, to some standpoint, is relating and communicating with others. And I don't know, you know, there isn't one prescribed way that that will happen. I think so much of it is kind of a on the job, on the spot type of thing. How, how would you define your architectural approach?
Personally, I would say it's the best. Pragmatically, I would say that according to my various Clifford Strengths tests or the DISC assessments, personally, my method is looking at the details, actually being involved in the weeds, being involved in the details to understand the why this is happening specifically for the reasons why. So it allows me to come to the table with other consultants that we're working with or architects to explain that the reason why we didn't know that their specific change happened was because they forgot to push this button that was on the second page of the PDF we already sent them 4 months ago, 3 times. So my specific approach has been knowing all the details and specifically pinpointing the reasons why something is or is not, which can definitely compare, contrast, and work together with those that will just go for the big picture rather than in the weeds and say, I want this to look like this. Whereas my approach is, that's fantastic. I think that's a great thing to look at or look like. Now, how do you suggest we do it? So the way that I come upon it is definitely different than everyone else's, may align with some others in the profession where come to the table with the details, come prepared, come with the exacts, but then it relates back to previously, know how to communicate that to those who aren't interested in knowing why it's A to B to C to D, when all they want to know is why is A and D not the same.
So what type of projects do you currently specialize in the at the firm that you're working at?
So I'll start with the rewind. Previously, back in Virginia, I worked on a lot of restaurant architecture and a lot of restaurants whom would work around the code that we were dealt with, where 90% of their building was factory space and only the front 10% was the actual restaurant space. Then I moved on to government work, working on the schools, the security vestibules, getting the lunch and learns about the ex-military guys who couldn't break a window with a bat after an hour and a half of trying because of the special new material. That led me on to working for Department of Defense projects, drone hangars. So those the thing that was just shot down or run over by the Russian jets over the Black Sea this week, I was designing hangars for them out in the Mojave Desert. And when I moved out to Texas for love, that was the experience I brought. And along with hospitality and just residential work. And my current boss told me, that's fantastic. That is exactly what our branch in another city does. Here, we do commercial office buildings, high-rise skyscrapers. Do you have any interest in that? Which I may be the anomaly, but I replied honestly, that is something that I've always been interested in. I worked on various codes in Grasshopper through Rhino and ideas on how that would actually work, but I have absolutely zero experience in that, but I'm very enthused about the idea. And lo and behold, that is where I work now. And now I'm part of the urban planning, master planning, and commercial office development teams.
I mean, Austin is such a rapidly growing city. Um, it's amazing. I've been there a couple of times, and to just look at the skyline of that city every time I've gone, just the number of high-rise buildings, just the number of buildings that have come downtown and what have you, is amazing. Are you mostly working in Austin or Texas, or are you pretty much working everywhere there's business?
So yes, to all of the above. My firm is a medium-sized firm to where we have over 100 people spread out over 4 offices. So we have the number of large firms, and we compete with other large firms directly. However, the Austin office operates as a hybrid because we don't have any admin staff here. We only have architects and interior designers here. We get to work with all the projects that may need our assistance, to where I've worked on projects in Colorado, in Texas. The coworker next to me has worked on a project that was down the street from where I used to live in Virginia. And I've had a lot of experiences with being on a project for a few weeks that are outside the state. However, most of my projects have been located in or around the local area of Austin. Just let's give it an hour radius, where it's projects that are master planning projects, that are projects that, you know, require the use of my drone to take pictures so we can, you know, accurately render or show the client, this is what it's going to look like 5 years from now. You're going to have your project that's right next to the Capitol, which I think is like 2 feet taller than the United States Capitol in DC. Just all those fun facts that are thrown out in marketing. And lo and behold, most of my projects are here in Austin, not in one specific area, just within the close relativeness. And as needed, I get put on projects that are outside of this, the city center.
There's obviously a tremendous interest and emphasis in the architecture world now about environmental and social sustainability. What role does green building play in the work that you and your firm are currently doing?
So I don't know if you've heard of this group called LEED. Have you? I'm seeing a nod, yes.
I have, yes, but I don't know that everybody has.
So my boss, Eric Van Hefty, and his wife, Michelle Van Hefty, were the driving force behind AEGB, the Austin Energy Green Building Initiative. I'm going to let you take a guess on where LEED took their ideas from. So I work for the husband behind the woman who created or helped create the standards from which LEED have cradled or took from and initiated the entire LEED sustainability projects from the 80s and 90s onwards.
Wow.
So I work, yes, my boss was one of the founders of AEGB, along with Michelle Van Hefty, Peter Pfeiffer and Associates, where it's a lot of the main people who started the entire green building, I wouldn't say agenda, but the whole green building initiative started here out in Austin, and it's their claim to fame. And LEED grew from the ideas from which Austin created them. So my firm really, really, really likes sustainability. We were the first office to make a mass timber office building in the state of Texas. I want to say in the United States, but I don't want to tout our horn too much.
Well, I know you said you went to Texas for love and followed your wife. Did you know when you interviewed at your firm just how closely they were tied to lead and sustainability? Was that an attractive factor to you, or was that something you found out later in the process?
If I can throw Eric under the bus, he spent about 25% of the interview talking about how great Boca Powell's sustainability initiatives were and how they tied in with him personally, where he doesn't see himself ever working for another firm because there's no other firm that is in Austin, previously or presently, that allow him to push the number of initiatives on sustainability and green building that Boca Powell has allowed the leeway to do, including, I guess, the reason why we've gotten 2 or 3 years in a row the books for sustainable and wood construction buildings delivered to our offices, along with very nice looking awards for the first mass timber office building.
That's great. That's great. So what do you think is more important for modern architecture, functionality or aesthetics?
I would say yes. Context is important. It definitely depends on the client, the purpose, and the precision. If you have a client that just wants a box so they can put stuff inside that, you're fulfilling your role as an architect for that client. If you're looking to another client who says, I want to have the gold standard of sustainability, I want my architects, my landscape architects, my interior designers to go with every single possible option that makes our stuff greener, more sustainable, and better for the people that inhabit it, you can go towards that. And then there's the third aspect of what do you think? What do you think is the right green building aspect? What is the right sustainable aspect? In what way do you believe that you can push forward, that you can convince your firm, that can in turn and convince your client towards the path of sustainability, the neoliberal ideals that Margaret Thatcher, believed in and promoting of the Canary Wharf? That is also an aspect in which you can consider. You may not, depending on where you work, you may not have the ability to immediately push forward sustainable ideals, sustainable ideology, sustainable rhetoric. However, you do have a starting point, a stepping stone. You can choose to move, you can choose to push forward, you can choose to do nothing. It's all a choice in which you make, and how much effort, how much push, how much conviction you have in promoting of that sustainability lies on your shoulders. You can have assistance from your coworkers, from your bosses, from your colleagues, from your peers. But in the end, the question to ask is, if not me, then who?
So if an aspiring architect is listening to this podcast, and we certainly hope that they are, what advice would you give them?
I would give a lot. My main advice would be to look to lift up those that don't seem enthusiastic. Not necessarily those that are saying, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? I don't want to do this because they don't do that. I would say, to aspiring architects, lead through example. There may not be somebody that you're working with or that that is the pinnacle of the ideal that you have on what an architect is or what they should be, use that. There's a lot of people who's grown up with parents who they would love to become or aspire to become or even be like. And there's the same amount of people who have parents who they would never want to be like. Use that. Use that inspiration. Use it as inspiration. You may know exactly who you want to be based off of somebody that you've known previously. And you also may know somebody who you never want to be like because of previous experiences. Consider everything. You may not like certain things or certain aspects. You may not like that it's a game on LinkedIn where you have to present yourself as this person who you don't feel you are. People don't feel like that or don't actually work like that, and that is totally okay. You can see somebody who took a leadership class or who took a professionalism class or something to that aspect, who look like they are groomed to be the next in line for something. They look like they've completely changed since you've known them, where they've gone from, hey, this is a person who I used to, totally agree with everything they post. And now they're tagging every single person under the sun in their Instagram posts to get clout and notoriety. That's okay. That's their path. What their path includes relative to you, that's for you to decide. You can decide if that's your pathway that you're going to work with, if you will tag every person under the sun in a social media post, or if you will work and put the work in to make the best drawings that you possibly can so that your firm, your people that you work with, your circle knows that you know what you're doing under the surface and it's not just a publicly facing thing. So to the aspiring architects out there, I would say that work to your strengths, understand your weaknesses, and push forward to where your weaknesses lie to improve them. You can't always play to your strengths. You may have to play to your weaknesses, but you don't know your weaknesses until you learn about them. So learn about them, exercise at them, and turn your weaknesses into your strengths or even into not your weaknesses anymore.
That's good advice. So our last question is, what's your hottest take on architecture?
My hottest take is that Margaret Thatcher was right. The Canary Wharf was a neoliberalism ideal. And if we can remove the specific words neo and liberalism, it's not blue states versus red states liberalism. It is the new ideals. Definitely look up David Harvey, look into the theory of neoliberalism and see that you can only go so far with your own ideals without working into the system of neoliberalism, where everything is a market and you can create new markets and exploit new markets through the efforts of the different lenses that society may put upon them. You can definitely learn a lot from history. So I would say, look at Margaret Thatcher, look at David Harvey, look at neoliberalism, and now compare the Canary Wharf to, I believe it is the Harbor Yards of New York and tell me how they are not the same.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today. You've given us a lot to think about, and your ideas are tremendously interesting and very, very different from others. And I think that that's what makes the series so valuable. And thank you for your advice and your insights. And thanks for joining us for Ask an Architect.
Absolutely. I apologize ahead of time for all of that you've learned, and I appreciate the time that you've given me. And I hope the best to AIAS, as they are the groups and the associations through which I was able to learn that there is way more to being an architect than just drawing. There's the whole network around you that can help you. So shout out to Nicole, the vice president, who I met 4 years ago, who she looked up to me, and now I look up to her.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.